Sometimes growth doesn't look like winning. It looks messy, uncomfortable, even like failure. But the truth is, some of the biggest signs you're moving forward in life are the ones that feel the hardest in the moment. You start to notice something changing when you begin questioning old habits and beliefs that once felt safe. Because the truth is, habits aren't just about what you do every day, they're about who you believe yourself to be. Maybe for years, you thought waking up late, skipping exercise, avoiding hard conversations, or brushing off responsibilities was just who you are, but now you catch yourself asking why. Why do I keep doing this? Why does this belief still guide me? Why do I keep holding on to something that isn't helping me? That questioning doesn't feel comfortable. It feels like pulling at a loose thread on your favorite sweater, because the more you tug, the more you see things unravel. But that unraveling is actually growth in disguise. The beliefs you grew up with, the ones you borrowed from your family, your culture, your environment, they might have felt like a foundation. But if you never stop to test them, you might be standing on shaky ground without even knowing it. Growth is when you stop living on autopilot and start paying attention to whether your habits are carrying you closer to the life you want or keeping you stuck exactly where you've been. It's not easy to question things you've relied on for years because there's comfort in routine, even when the routine isn't serving you. Think about it. How many times have you repeated to yourself that you're just not a morning person, or you're bad with money, or you can't speak up in a meeting because you're shy? Those aren't truths. Those are beliefs you accepted somewhere along the way. And every time you repeat them, you reinforce them. Growth happens when you hear yourself say it and then stop to ask, is that actually true? Or is it just a story I've been living in? The moment you start challenging those automatic scripts, you're already creating space for something new, and that space is where change begins. And here's the thing, questioning old habits and beliefs doesn't always look heroic. It looks awkward. It looks like you deciding not to scroll through your phone before bed and then lying there in silence, uncomfortable with your own thoughts. It looks like saying no to people you used to say yes to and then second guessing yourself after. It looks like trying to speak up in a room and stumbling over your words. From the outside, it might not look like progress at all, but it is, because every time you step outside the safety of what you've always done, you're building the courage to create a better version of yourself. Sometimes people around you won't understand. They'll say you've changed, and they'll say it like it's a bad thing. But growth is supposed to change you. If you're the same person you were 5 years ago, repeating the same patterns and clinging to the same excuses, you're not living, you're just recycling yesterday. When you start asking tough questions about why you believe what you believe, why you do what you do, you're no longer a prisoner of old programming. You're free to rewrite the code. That doesn't mean it's easy, it means you're finally aware enough to choose. And choice is the birthplace of growth. When you challenge old habits, you're going to hit resistance, not just from others, but from yourself. Your brain loves what's familiar, even when familiar is destructive. So the moment you try to break free, your mind whispers, go back, this is uncomfortable, this is unsafe. But that voice isn't truth, it's just fear disguised as logic. And the more you lean into questioning, the more you realize the discomfort isn't a sign you're failing, it's a sign you're growing. Because nothing new ever feels comfortable at first. You didn't know how to walk without falling. You didn't know how to ride a bike without wobbling. And you won't know how to break old beliefs without stumbling. But stumbling isn't the end. It's the beginning of transformation. You start to realize growth is happening when people who once felt permanent in your life begin to drift away, because the truth is not everyone is meant to stay with you through every chapter of your journey. Some people were only meant for the old version of you, the version that settled, the version that stayed quiet, the version that accepted less than you deserved. And when you start raising your standards, the people who can't meet them naturally fall back. It feels like loss. It feels like rejection. It feels like failure, but it's actually proof that you are aligning with a new level of yourself. Think about it. When you were younger, you probably had friends you couldn't imagine living without, yet over time those friendships faded, not because either of you were bad people, but because you were growing in different directions. That's what happens when you evolve. Your circle changes because your values change, and not everyone is willing or able to make that climb with you. At first it's confusing because you think if someone leaves, it means you've done something wrong, but sometimes it's not about wrong, it's about growth. You start noticing you can't laugh at the same jokes anymore. You can't bond over the same negativity. You don't get the same fulfillment from conversations that used to entertain you. And it's not that you're better than them, it's that you're becoming different than you used to be. When you shift your focus from gossip to goals, from comfort to challenge, from avoiding pain to building resilience, you will feel the gap grow between you and people who still live in that old rhythm. And that gap is uncomfortable because you wonder if you're isolating yourself. But what's really happening is you're making room for connections that match who you're becoming instead of who you were. Losing people hurts because human beings are wired for connection, and when someone pulls away or you pull away from them, it feels like a piece of you is missing. But here's the hard truth. Sometimes the people you lose were never meant to be permanent anchors. They were temporary teachers. They showed you what loyalty looks like, or what betrayal feels like, or how it feels to be unseen, and once the lesson is learned, your paths no longer align. Growth means you stop forcing relationships that don't fit anymore, because forcing what doesn't fit isn't love, it's fear. And when you let go, you create space for the right people to find you, the ones who challenge you to grow even more, the ones who believe in your vision, the ones who don't guilt you for changing but celebrate it. You'll notice this shift most when you start setting boundaries. The people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will resist. They'll accuse you of being selfish, cold, or distant. But that's because they were comfortable with a version of you that gave without limits. Boundaries are a sign of growth, and not everyone has the maturity to respect them. When you stop picking up the phone every time someone calls, when you say no without explaining yourself, when you choose to protect your peace over pleasing others, some people will leave. And as painful as it is, that's how you know you're on the right track, because the people who truly value you will adjust, not abandon. It's not about cutting everyone off. It's about recognizing when connections are no longer healthy, when they no longer reflect the person you're trying to become. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for yourself is allow the distance, let the silence settle, and trust that not everyone is meant to walk with you forever. Because growth is not just about adding new things to your life, it's about subtracting what no longer serves you, and that subtraction often includes people. It feels like you're losing, but in reality, you're making space for alignment, and alignment always brings stronger connections than attachment ever could. You can tell you're growing when you start feeling uncertain because you're stepping into new territory, and that uncertainty is one of the clearest signs you're moving beyond the familiar. Comfort feels safe because it's predictable, but predictable doesn't mean purposeful. It just means you've been repeating the same patterns for so long that they feel natural. When you take a step outside that circle, your brain immediately sends alarms telling you that something is wrong, when in reality, nothing is wrong. You're just experiencing the discomfort of progress. Think about the first time you drove a car, walked into a new job, or tried speaking in front of a crowd. None of that felt steady in the beginning. Your hands shook, your heart raced, your mind doubted if you could do it. And yet, over time, what was once terrifying became normal. That's exactly how growth feels. The very uncertainty you're trying to avoid is actually the evidence that you're building something new. Most people mistake uncertainty for failure because we've been taught that if we don't feel confident, we must not be ready. But confidence doesn't come before action, it comes after. You don't feel certain and then move forward. You move forward and then certainty builds with repetition. Growth means accepting that you will not always know what the next step looks like. You won't always feel prepared, and you won't always have a clear guarantee of success. And that's exactly why so many people stay stuck. They wait for the fear to leave before they move, not realizing that fear is the very sign they're moving in the right direction. If it scares you but it doesn't harm you, it's probably the stretch you need. Uncertainty shows up in the smallest ways, too. It's not just about big career leaps or life changes. It's choosing to speak your mind in a room where you'd normally stay silent. It's admitting you don't know something instead of pretending. It's showing up to the gym when you feel out of place. It's saying yes to an opportunity that feels bigger than your skill set. These moments don't come with instant confidence. They come with shaky voices, awkward starts, and plenty of self-doubt. But those shaky moments are proof that you're in motion, and motion is always better than paralysis. Growth isn't about walking boldly into every room with unshakable certainty. It's about walking in anyway, even when your voice trembles and your legs feel heavy. And the truth is, uncertainty isn't your enemy. It's your teacher. It teaches you to adapt, to problem solve, to lean on resilience instead of perfection. It teaches you that you can survive not knowing, that you can survive discomfort, that you can survive mistakes. Every time you face uncertainty and keep moving forward, you rewire your brain to see the unknown not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And over time, what once terrified you becomes your new normal. And then you'll face another layer of uncertainty, and the cycle continues. That's what growth looks like. Not a straight line of confidence, but a series of uncertain steps that eventually lead to strength. Sometimes people around you will question your uncertainty. They'll say you don't seem ready or you look unsure, but they don't realize that readiness is a myth. Nobody is ever fully ready. People who succeed are not the ones who knew everything beforehand. They're the ones who were willing to step into the unknown and figure it out as they went. That willingness to be uncertain is what separates growth from stagnation. If you only ever move when things are clear, you'll never go further than the boundaries you already know. But if you allow yourself to move through the fog, to embrace the discomfort of not knowing exactly how it will work out, you'll look back and realize that uncertainty was the bridge that carried you into a better version of yourself. You know you're growing when setbacks show up, and instead of breaking you, they start teaching you resilience. Because the truth is, life will never be a straight line, and if you're only willing to move forward when everything goes your way, you'll never make it far. Growth shows itself in the way you respond when the plan falls apart, when the opportunity slips through your fingers, when the timing doesn't match your expectations. Most people see setbacks as proof they aren't meant to continue. They see failure as a dead end, but growth changes the way you see it. You begin to realize that setbacks are not the wall in front of you. They're the weights in the gym that force you to build strength. Every disappointment becomes a rep. Every delay becomes a stretch. Every rejection becomes a lesson that equips you for the next step you couldn't have taken without it. At first, setbacks hurt, and they're supposed to. You wanted it to work out, you had the picture in your mind, you invested time, energy, heart, maybe even money, and then it didn't unfold the way you planned. Growth doesn't mean pretending it doesn't sting. Growth means refusing to let the sting define you. Instead of saying, I failed, you start saying, I learned. Instead of saying, this is the end, you start asking, what is this teaching me? That shift doesn't make the setback disappear, but it transforms the way you walk through it. You begin to see that every person you admire, every success story you look up to, is built on a mountain of failed attempts that no one talks about. Resilience is not about avoiding pain. It's about training yourself to stand back up every time life knocks you down. And each time you do, you stand taller than before. Think about how kids learn to walk. They fall more times than they actually walk in the beginning, but each fall teaches balance, teaches coordination, teaches persistence. If you judged a toddler by their first 20 falls, you'd think they were failing. But we know falling is how they learn to walk. The same is true for you. Every setback is your fall, and every comeback is you learning to walk at a higher level. Growth means you stop interpreting setbacks as permanent labels and start seeing them as temporary lessons. You stop asking why me and start asking what now. That's the difference between someone who gets stuck in the same cycle and someone who transforms their life. Resilience doesn't just show up in big failures. It shows up in the small, daily frustrations, too. When you're stuck in traffic and your plans are delayed. When you get critical feedback on work you thought was perfect. When people misunderstand you. When unexpected bills pile up. When you feel like nothing is moving forward fast enough. In those moments, your old self might have exploded, quit, or spiraled into negativity. Growth is when you pause, breathe, and choose a different response. It doesn't mean you don't feel the frustration. It means you don't let the frustration dictate your next move. That subtle shift is resilience, and resilience compounded over time becomes unshakable strength. One of the hardest lessons in growth is realizing that setbacks are not detours from your path. They are the path. You can't build resilience in theory, you build it in real time, through real losses, through real disappointments, through real moments where you wonder if it's even worth continuing. And every time you decide to keep going, you're writing a new definition of yourself. You're no longer the person who quits at the first sign of resistance. You're the person who bends but doesn't break. That identity becomes your anchor in future storms, because once you've survived setbacks before, you know you can survive them again. That knowledge doesn't take away the pain, but it gives you the confidence to endure it. The truth is, setbacks are uncomfortable because they expose how little control we actually have, but they also reveal how much strength we carry inside us. Every time you survive something you thought would break you, you prove to yourself that you're stronger than you realized. That proof builds resilience, and resilience is the foundation for every kind of growth. You begin to notice growth when you stop obsessing over perfection and start valuing progress, because perfection is an illusion that keeps you frozen in place, while progress is the engine that keeps you moving forward. For so long, many of us have been conditioned to think that if something isn't flawless, it's not worth doing, and that mindset is exactly what paralyzes people from ever starting. Growth is when you realize that showing up imperfectly is still 1,000 times better than waiting forever to show up perfectly. You learn that every small step counts, every imperfect action builds momentum, and momentum is what creates change. Perfection whispers that you're not ready, that you're not good enough, that someone else is already doing it better, but progress whispers something different. It says, keep going, learn as you move, and improvement will come. Perfection is heavy. It's a weight you carry that makes you afraid of mistakes, afraid of judgment, afraid of looking like you don't know what you're doing. But growth is when you finally set that weight down and realize mistakes aren't proof you failed. They're proof you're trying. You can only get better at what you're willing to be bad at first, and progress means embracing that awkward beginner stage instead of hiding from it. Think about it. Nobody starts at the finish line. Every musician, every athlete, every speaker, every leader you admire had a season where they stumbled, where they were clumsy, where they doubted themselves. The difference between them and the ones who never made it is that they valued progress over perfection. They kept showing up. They kept learning. They kept stacking effort on effort until the skill sharpened and the confidence grew. Growth feels different when you shift this mindset, because instead of beating yourself up for not being exactly where you want to be, you start noticing how far you've already come. You stop measuring success by comparison and start measuring it by progress. Did you handle a situation today better than you would have a year ago? That's growth. Did you take one step forward, even if it wasn't 10? That's growth. Did you learn something from a mistake that will help you next time? That's growth. Perfection never lets you celebrate those wins, but progress teaches you to value them because they add up. And those small wins, stacked day after day, eventually create the transformation you were chasing all along. This shift also changes how you see failure. When you're addicted to perfection, failure feels like the end of the story, like proof that you should quit. But when you value progress, failure just becomes feedback. It becomes information. It becomes a signal pointing you toward what needs adjustment. Instead of quitting, you pivot. Instead of hiding, you refine. Instead of stopping, you continue. That ability to keep moving despite setbacks is what separates those who grow from those who stay stuck. And here's the secret. Progress is messy. It doesn't look glamorous. It doesn't look like the highlight reels you see online. It looks like long nights of trying again. It looks like rewriting the same page a dozen times. It looks like practicing in silence when no one is watching. It looks like saying the wrong thing and then correcting yourself the next time. But that mess is where the growth happens. You'll look back one day and realize all those imperfect efforts were the building blocks that created the version of yourself you were trying to reach. When you stop idolizing perfection, you give yourself permission to be human, and being human means being a work in progress. That permission frees you to try, to learn, to risk, to stumble, and to get up again. And every time you get back up, Every time you take one more step, every time you choose progress over paralysis, you prove to yourself that growth isn't about flawless execution. It's about consistent movement forward. That's when you realize the person who insists on perfection will always be waiting, but the person who chooses progress is already growing.